Meredith and all, Rich, you guys have anything to share before I get started?
No, I guess I'll just say welcome, everybody. This is a new feature for Midstate Massive. We're super excited to have Skratch on board in a big expanded role. Colette having been part of that. And Andy Marks and I are the race directors for the Midstate Massive. Meredith is our director of runner support, runner experience. And so she's paired up with Colette, is preparing all of the on-course nutrition. I don't know, Meredith, if you could say a couple of words about what we've got in store for everybody.
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. I actually pulled together a document that has all of your on-course food. It's pretty specific. It doesn't give totally all the details, but it gives you an idea of what you're going to see at each aid station. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the chat, and that you can use for reference as you're planning out your nutrition. But I'm really excited about this webinar and just the real value in like learning this information. And I know as an ultra runner myself, it's very hard to get this info. So we're all really excited about this, and I really hope you all enjoy it.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. The first things first, I know a bunch of people submitted questions. That's amazing. We are going to get through them. Hopefully, I will answer some of them with my slides. But we're going to start with like basics, because I really think that foundational nutrition is so important. And a lot of us are taught nutrition in so many different ways. I'll tell you, like, I didn't really learn about nutrition until I was in college. I was a tennis player in high school, and honestly, I was eating having Dr. Pepper and Funyuns before my games, and that is on the right track, but also kind of wrong, like at the same time. And so I always was really interested in learning more and being able to teach people more. And I don't think you're ever, you never stop learning about nutrition, because it changes all the time. When our founder at Skratch, Dr. Alan Lim, wrote his first cookbook, the Feed Zone cookbook, some of that information in there now after like 12 years is pretty outdated. So nutrition always changes, and I'm always happy to share more information. So we're going to go ahead and get started with some of the basics. First things first, I always like to talk about your everyday nutrition, not just what's happening during a training session and during a race, because truth is, like, 80% of your day is your nutrition outside of your training. So that has to be dialed in as much as your race training has to be dialed in, because that's going to affect your overall training blocks rather than just, that training session. So one thing I really like to reiterate, because as adults, especially working American adults, we do not take time for ourselves to make sure that we are consistent with our habits, especially when it comes to eating. I am just as much of a culprit of this as you guys are, but eating regularly is super important for maintaining your energy levels and building on your energy stores. And so if you're not eating consistently, you're really missing the mark on consistency for overall progress. And so I'm really big on, you need to be eating 3 meals a day and filling in snacks when you have really long gaps in between meals. So like for me, lunch to dinner is a really big gap usually, because sometimes I won't eat breakfast until like 8 or 9 o'clock, and I will have lunch at like 11 to 12:30. So like that's not that big of a gap. But anytime I'm over 4 hours, I really like to think about, how do I build in some snacks into my day and what might that look like? But eating consistently is something that our body really needs. I hear a lot of questions about intermittent fasting and all of that stuff. Truly, for most endurance athletes, that's not very helpful. And if you're a female, especially an aging female like most of us are, it's even less helpful. There's a lot of hormones that come into play. And so I always like to mention this, because I get a lot of questions about intermittent fasting as part of building your, using your energy better and all of that. I don't necessarily think it's the best option. I think that eating more consistently is what endurance athletes need. So don't skip breakfast, especially don't skip lunch, which is what most of us do if we're busy at work. And breakfast is also a common one. Most of us are pretty good about dinner, but breakfast and lunch, I always tell people to like think about your life and try to figure out how can you make that easier so you're more consistent. For me, that means sometimes that like breakfast is a bar because I'm on the go. And sometimes for lunch, it's like kind of like a mishmash of snacks because I didn't really plan to cook anything for myself. But that's okay because I still ate. When it comes to snacking at night, which is a question I get all the time, is like, should I be snacking at night? What should I be snacking at night? Do I stop eating after dinner and call it a day? If your body is hungry, your body is telling you that it needs food, do not ignore that. I always say that nighttime snacks should be something that's high in protein because we're trying to kickstart our recovery. Most of our recovery happens when we're sleeping. And so if you try to boost up your protein before you sleep, you're going to see much better recovery while you're sleeping. And honestly, when you sleep with a full stomach, you get better deep sleep. Therefore, your overall recovery is just better. So things like at night that I might recommend is maybe a protein shake if that's easy for you and you don't want something difficult. I love Greek yogurt or cottage cheese. Sometimes it's, a piece of bread with like peanut butter on it. I kind of mix it up depending on what I'm feeling. Sometimes I'll eat like leftovers because I'm still hungry enough, but I want just like a little snack of it. There's lots of options, cheese and crackers with deli meat, like whatever you want. Like there's tons of things that you can do, but you just really want to get something that's more focused on the protein when you're going to bed. The next thing I like to talk about is like what should be on your plate. What should your plate look like on most days? I always say that you want to kind of think about this, and like these training like guidelines are probably really ridiculous to you guys because there's no way that you're doing like an easy training day that's like just yoga or something. Like that's not usually what happens with my ultra runners. And so I always say your easy, moderate, and hard day are going to be very different than somebody else's easy, moderate, and hard days. You have to start to recognize what that looks like and how you're going to adjust your fueling to those differences in your days, whether it means more time, more mileage, or more effort. That's kind of dependent on the person. So really think about that. But what I'm going to show you is what your plate kind of transforms as you are eating or fueling more and you're exercising more, what your plate needs to transform to. So let's say you're on a rest day or, you're kind of doing a little bit more recovery work or whatever it is. And you're like, I just, I don't need to be eating the way that I do when I'm running, upwards of, multiple hours. So you're going to definitely adjust what you eat. So probably the lightest I would say you would eat is probably something like this plate, an easy training plate where half of your plate is color, fruits, vegetables. I don't care. They all do the same stuff to an extent. You have hydration, you have fiber, and you have nutrients. That's all that's really in our fruits and vegetables. And so getting anything, eat the rainbow, whatever sounds good. If it's breakfast, you're probably going to have more fruit. If it's dinner, you're probably going to have more vegetable. So just kind of figure out what that means to you. But as we move through training, which you'll see, so as our training gets more difficult, the ratios start to change. And what ratio is really changing, and you'll see this from the moderate training now to the hard day, is that our carbohydrates really start ramping up the more we're training. And that's because glycogen is in our muscles, which is our stored form of carbohydrates and energy. And glycogen needs to be replenished. So the more you're using, the more you have to give back to your body. And the best way to do that is eating it through your meals. So as you progress, your plate, basically, your protein always stays the same. Your body wants the same amount of protein no matter what time of the day it is. It does better with more consistent protein feedings rather than dumping all your protein in one meal. So protein kind of stays the same no matter breakfast, lunch, or dinner, whatever your training looks like. Fruits and veggies and carbs are kind of going to fluctuate, and you just need to adjust based off. If I had a harder training day, maybe I'm going to focus on half my plate being carbs. Maybe I'm going to grab that extra serving of whatever. But maybe on another day where I maybe didn't train as much as I am, or I'm in a shorter training block or a lighter training block, maybe I am going to try with maybe a little bit of extra fruits and vegetables first to see if I can satisfy myself, and then see if that's enough fueling. And if not, then you just have a snack later. But I think learning how to adjust your plate is really helpful, especially when you're getting into like the week of the race and you are starting to like think about carb loading and all of those things. So with carb loading, you're probably going to want to be at least at this hard training plate, and if not more. I have some of my athletes having like 70% of their intake the days before a race as a higher carbohydrate content. Whether that means snacks or at meals, they kind of make the decision, but we are increasing carbs. So this helps you get some better visuals, because I don't necessarily think that counting and measuring and scanning barcodes and all that stuff, it's stressful. It's not worth it when we have methods like this that were developed by the US Olympic Center alongside universities to be able to teach athletes how to fuel. So you don't really need to measure, count, all that stuff. Just look at the ratios on your plate. If you are 2 days out from a race, is your plate mainly carbohydrates? If it's not, then now your brain is starting to think like, I need to make a change. I need to add something. I need to, maybe dial down on the protein, or maybe I don't want that much fiber before a race, so I'm going to cut it out a little bit. But having visuals of your plate is always easiest, because whether you're traveling, you're cooking for yourself, you're eating with other people, you can always make a plate based off of your ratios, but you can't always dictate what is going to be served in front of you. So I always say that that's a really helpful visual, because we're busy people and we're on the go and we're not always going to have so much control, but this allows us to have more control over our meals no matter what we're being served. The next thing I like to talk about, because we talked about carbohydrates, carb loading a little bit, all of that, is like, what's the difference between the types of carbohydrates? We always hear like, these are simple, these are complex, this is, slow digesting, this is fast digesting. Like, what do I need to know about that? Because how does that affect my performance? So simple carbohydrates are always going to be things that are quick digesting. They have very little protein or fiber, so they hit our bloodstream much faster. They are going to spike our blood sugar way faster than something that's more complex. I would say somewhere within a minute to 10 minutes is kind of like that fast, simple carbohydrate. You're just basically going to see like that blood sugar raise up, and then at some point it'll start falling. With a complex carbohydrate, that has usually some kind of a fiber or a protein to slow down the digestion. So instead of seeing a spike go up like this, you're going to see something that kind of rolls like a hill instead of a really sharp peak. And so when we think about this, we think about, what products are going to fit in these categories. So a simple carbohydrate might be something like a white rice or Ritz crackers or plain cereal or fruit, or I would say like even I'm trying to think of like sports nutrition products. Let's talk about hydration mixes, typically more simple sugars, chews, more simple sugars, gels, more simple sugars, because you want those things to hit your system a lot faster. When you're thinking about complex carbohydrates, that's things like when you eat a bowl of oatmeal, or you have whole grain tortillas, or you're using a brown rice instead of a white rice. Or let's think about even sports nutrition products. Again, let's say you use something that's like an oatmeal bar, or like Skratch has a high carb drink mix that uses cluster dextrin, or other brands use things like maltodextrin, like Morton would, or some of the other brands out there that you'll see these more complex carbs. So even things like UCAN are going to have more of a complex carbohydrate that is a slower burning carbohydrate. So when do we use these things is the biggest question, because now but when do you use them? Usually complex I use for more meals or snacks where I want to stay fuller, or in like for people who can digest more whole foods easily. That's not necessarily true when it comes to sports nutrition liquid, where it has complex carbs, because those tend to do better for people who have stomach issues. But I usually think of the complex for like when you want more of a slow and steady burn rather than like you need a boost. So when we think about even like during a race or training, you may want to start with some quick carbohydrates to get your system going. And then you may introduce some complex carbohydrates to keep you more even keel. But the research still is kind of out there on like how different are those carbohydrates when you are exercising. Truly, for most people, I think it's go with what sits well when you're racing or you're training, because you can adjust your nutrition based off of how often you need to eat or how much easier. But basically for most of your meals outside, I do like having a combination based off of what we're doing. I have a slide next kind of talking about how to choose the best carbohydrate as a pre-fuel, because a lot of people, especially my runners, you guys are really good at not wanting to eat before a run. Like it is very common. You don't want to carry anything and you don't want to eat anything because it feels heavy, which is very fair because your stomach is just shaking the whole time you're running. So it doesn't feel good when there's stuff in there. So how do you pick something that is going to sit well, but also just not be super heavy? And so if you have more than an hour, I usually say, then you can start adding some complex stuff, because it's going to be a while until you actually do go out and exercise and you want it to be sustained until then. So I would do something like, if you have more than an hour, you could do an oatmeal, maybe whole wheat toast with peanut butter on it, maybe cereal with milk, maybe it's some pasta with a little bit of like veggies in there or whatever it is that you want. You can do something more complex. You can actually eat real food most of the time. When you have less than an hour, I always think simple, because you don't want that sitting in your stomach for too long and you don't want to feel heavy. So that might mean fruit snacks, granola bars, fig Newtons, waffles, potatoes. Some people make energy bites. Some people might eat cereal, but they'll pick something that's more of like not a whole grain. So for example, like some of my athletes will have like a bowl of Lucky Charms before they go out for a run, because they know that's going to go right through their system and it's not going to feel heavy. But if they were eating a cereal for breakfast when they weren't going to go for a run, might be something more like a Raisin Bran or a Kashi cereal or whatever it is. So you can adjust things based off of how much time you have and how much you want sitting in your stomach. But lots of different options for pre-fueling. Kind of walking into race day nutrition pretty quickly. I like to give people like a little bit of a timeline to think about. Everyone's timeline might be a little bit different based off of what you're comfortable with and what your fueling strategy is going to be. But this is just a template for a lot of my athletes. And I use this for all different kinds of races. So we might use this for like an ultra race. We might use this for a cycling race. It might be even a track meet, like whatever it is. We can adjust this, but thinking through a timeline is really helpful. So I always have people start thinking a couple days before their race. So what should you be doing a couple days before your race? You should be hydrating more, because especially if you're not sure about the weather, you want to be well hydrated going into this race. The second thing you want to do is start increasing your carbohydrate intake, because you are going to need to make sure that you are well fueled going into it. I'm not saying you have to have excessive amounts of carbs, especially if you're someone who consistently and regularly eats a good amount of carbs. You don't need to go crazy on the carb load. If you're someone who has a lower carbohydrate content usually throughout your week, you may need more than what you typically would. But someone who typically eats a good amount of carbs, I usually say you can just up it a little bit. But if you're like a low carbohydrate eater, you may need to up it a lot more than you typically do. I usually say like the sweet spot is about 6 to 10 grams per kilogram of your body weight of carbohydrates. And if you don't want to do that math and the counting and all of that stuff, I always just say that about 1/2 to 3/4 of your plate need to be carbs. So if you can just get that down, that's perfect. Night before, I always try to increase sodium intake so that you're well hydrated going into the race and you're not having to think about it the morning of the race. So if you go to bed well hydrated, you are in a much better shape than if you just wait till the morning to like take in all your electrolytes to be ready for the race. Yes, electrolytes before the race are very effective. But if you can set yourself up where you're well hydrated and now you're not playing catch up, that's the best thing you can do. So what I usually do is, whether it's an electrolyte drink, so maybe I'll have some Skratch. Usually if it's the night before, I use the Wellness or the Hyper because it has more sodium, and I like to increase sodium, especially for hot races. But if not, if you're like, I don't have sports nutrition products on me, what can you do? Salt your food really well for your dinner. Have salty snacks before bed. So like a bag of potato chips. I love if you're eating out, or even if you're home, like a bowl of soup, even though like it sounds crazy in the summer, but like soup is pretty salty. And so whether it's like a miso soup, a ramen, a chicken noodle soup, a canned tomato soup, whatever, if that is something that you can incorporate, that's natural electrolytes that you can just eat. And sometimes that's a little bit easier than always feeling like you have to use a sports nutrition drink. And honestly, sometimes it's a little bit cheaper. So you can do it that way, because I'm always trying to be budget conscious. You don't have to use sports nutrition products for everything. There are solutions. They just take a little bit, maybe more effort than sometimes a sports nutrition product is. So another great one that I love is a can of V8 juice. The tomato juice, like the can, like a little tiny can, that's all you need. That's a good amount of sodium, and it hydrates you really well. And then once you drink something like that, then you follow it with water as long as you're thirsty. And the good thing is, if you do this the night before, if you have to go to the bathroom a bunch, you'll do it the night before. You won't do it the morning of or during the race. You'll have like a little bit more control over how well hydrated you are. Then moving into the morning of the race, you need to eat a breakfast that's familiar to you and that is nutritious enough to hold you over until the race starts. Some people will limit fat and fiber. So if you're someone who has a lot of stomach issues, I typically start removing fat and fiber from the diet at least the morning of. Some of my athletes, maybe a couple days before, will start removing the fiber so that they don't have as many GI issues on the day of a race. It's kind of up to you. Sometimes I even say, like, you may just want to switch from like raw fruits and vegetables to like cooked stuff, because it's a little bit easier to digest those days leading up, and that might work. But you should also be sipping on hydration. I always say to my athletes, like, mix up a bottle of hydration for yourself, put it next to your bedside table when you're going to bed before a race, and just the minute your feet touch the floor that morning, you're going to start drinking fluid, because typically we're just so caught up in the morning that we don't really get to think about that stuff. And if you make it easy for yourself, it's less of a problem. So think about that in the morning. I also like, within an hour of the race, I like to top off fuels. So I will either have my athletes do a liquid bottle. So we'll do like 10 to 12 ounces of a concentrated drink mix. So for some of my athletes, that's like, 3 scoops of hydration mix, or if we're using our high carb, we'll put like 2 hydration mix and 2 of the high carb to kind of balance that out. But also I've had athletes who have a gel before the start of a race. They might have fruit snacks. They may have an applesauce packet. They may have, like a smoothie juice. You can have so many different things, but you just do need some type of carb an hour before, because especially if you've eaten like 2 or 3 hours earlier, you may need to top off those fuels. You've moved around, you've gotten ready, you've warmed up a little bit. You probably do need a little bit of fuel so that you can start at full tank going into the race. It also just allows you to have a little bit of a shorter window to think about fueling. You don't have to necessarily feel like you have to start fueling right away if you have done like some kind of a start line top off, is what I usually like to call it. So that might look different for everyone. Totally, everyone does this morning routine very differently. So I respect whatever people want to do. I'm like, you need to think about what that looks like for you and like map it out. During the race, you got to keep the carbs going, especially for an ultra marathon. There is a need for a lot of fuel because you are burning a lot. So get in your electrolytes, get in your carbohydrates, figure out what that's going to look like for you. Most of my athletes can at least minimum get 30 grams of carbohydrates. But really what I say is that most people can top off at about 100, but you want to be looking at your data. look at the data from your runs. See on estimate how many calories you're burning per hour and use that as your average. And so once you have that average, you're like, okay, I burn 400 calories per hour. That means that I need usually I say about half of that is the minimum. So I need at minimum 200 calories per hour to sustain myself. And so that's about 50 grams of carbs. So what is 50 grams of carbs per hour that I can mix in? Maybe that's 20 grams comes from a hydration that I'm drinking and 30 grams comes from a honey stinger waffle that I ate. Like whatever it is, you're going to try to figure out what that balance is. Some of my athletes are like, I'm just going to do all liquid nutrition. Great. As long as you're matching what you're losing at minimum, you're in a good place. One other tidbit, like if you're not sure and you don't track, about no matter if you run or walk a mile, it's about 100 calories. So if you're like someone that's not sure, you can use that as a gauge to kind of dictate how much you might need. Most people, a good place to start is about 200 calories per hour. That's what I typically recommend is somewhere between 150 to 200 to start if you're not there, and then move your way up until I basically say you can keep increasing your fuel until you start maybe noticing some GI stuff. I usually say that most people can train their gut to take in more fuel. And as you do that, you are going to have more fuel in the tank, which is more advantageous because there's less chance of bonking. We always want that minimum so that we aren't bonking. And then for recovery, no matter if it's training or a race day, don't forget about your recovery. I know that it's really there's a lot of stuff going on a race day, but your recovery is like probably the most important on those days because it dictates how fast you're going to be able to get back into it. And you've just done a lot of work and you need to recover. There's no excuse to it. So I always say that thinking about some kind of recovery, and we're going to talk about recovery in a second. All right. Also, if you guys have questions that are popping up, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. I'm happy to stop at any point. I think someone asked about some fuel options that you could have during a race. Like, what are some things that people are eating during races? And Meredith has a great guide that we kind of talked about, like what was going to be served at all the different aid stations and all of that. But I like to talk about some stuff that you can even use in your training. And I always say you should be with some of the nutrition that you are going to see on race day. So if you are planning to use those aid stations, make sure you know what's going to be there and that maybe you need to practice with some of that too. Maybe not just the stuff that you've always been practicing with. If you are going to rely on aid stations, please practice with some of those fuels that are going to be offered. So one of my favorite that a lot of people, it's kind of like some people know about it, some people don't, but rice cakes. Rice is one of the most easy to digest foods when we're exercising because, or at least of the solid carbohydrates, because it's full of moisture. It's all moisture because you cook it in water. And so it's super light on the stomach. It doesn't have a lot of fiber. It doesn't have a lot of protein. So it's going to travel well in your gut. And for a lot of people, rice is very soothing if they're having a hard gut issue. So it works in very many ways. So why do we care about rice cakes? Like why a rice cake other than, something else? I like them because they're moist. So they don't need a lot of extra hydration with it. So you're not feeling like you have to chug a bottle of fluid after you've had something that was dense. You can get a lot of calories in a rice cake. And that's what I love about it is that you can mix and match it, get creative with it, put the stuff you like in it and really enjoy a fuel option that's real food. I like that it's also not a packaged good and I can make it anytime and it's really budget friendly. So sometimes my rice cake is rice and eggs with soy sauce and maple syrup mixed in because I just wanted something that was super simple. That's not as expensive to make a tray of that for me than it is to buy a box of bars. And so for me, sometimes that's like a better fuel option. I also like if you're someone who has a lot of allergies or worries about certain stuff, you have a lot of control over what goes in these and they're pretty allergen friendly. Some people reheat them. You can make really large batches if you have a large training block and use them for that. We have tons of recipes on our website and lots of different options on what you can do, lots of tips on how to even make it. But even here, like I'm showing you some varieties of what you can do. Eggs and bacon, sausage and eggs, tofu, smoked salmon. We can do sweet. We can do blueberry almond butter chocolate, raspberry and mint, pumpkin spice, Oreo, raisins and walnuts. I've had someone do a trail mix one before. There's so many different options, and they honestly taste pretty good, and most people are really receptive to it. What are some other things, though, that you could bring along with you? Because I always get questions about whole food options, which I think is really important. There's a balance between packaged products and whole foods. We want to have a little bit of both, most likely, because a lot of people need variety. And also, we have to be budget friendly, because training for an ultra, you eat a lot. And so you got to think about the cost a little bit. So trying to find some things that maybe are easier to stock up on is really nice to have. So other portables that my athletes bring along for ultra marathons: hand pies, protein bites. We make little rice balls, banana bread, polenta cakes, homemade fruit roll-ups, tortilla roll-ups, sushi. Like there's like tons of options. Obviously, like not raw fish sushi, but like you can make like veggie rolls out of rice and veggies and avocados and stuff like that. I do not recommend raw fish for a fueling option. I don't even know. Like I should have specified that on the slides, but like I mean more like a rice roll, and not like please don't make a salmon roll to eat on a run. Like that does not sound pleasant for anybody. But yeah, these are some of the portable options. There's lots of different ideas out there. I love banana bread, so like that's one of my favorites to bring along if I can. I'm seeing some questions in this. I'm gonna oh yeah. 200 calories is my minimum for most people. Really, for most people, I love them eating more. If you can target 300, 400, 500 calories, great. But it takes time. Like you guys must have noticed too, that it does take time to get up there in those calories. Like it didn't happen overnight for most of you, and it can still progress. I have one athlete who eats about liquid calories. He probably has about 150 grams of carbohydrates. So that's like 600 calories. Like that's a lot. That's probably an anomaly for me, because yeah, that's 600 calories. That's an anomaly to me because I don't think most people can handle that right away, but he trained his gut to get there. So kind of figuring out what works best for you. I always say that like half the calories you're burning is your minimum, so that you don't fall into a hole of being behind. But love everyone sharing your insights and stuff. You guys all learn from each other, truly. Sports nutrition is not what one size fits all, and experimenting on yourself is one of the best things you can do, because I can give you suggestions and foundations, but you got to figure out what feels good for your body and how you're going to adjust it to make sense for you. So hearing what other people are doing, if you guys have portable ideas or like share some of the stuff you guys are eating during training or for long runs, so that other people have a good idea of what they could try too, because sometimes I get really great ideas from even my athletes. Yeah. So definitely share your insights. I love everyone sharing like what they're targeting and all of that, because it's super helpful just to get an idea of what other people are doing. Okay. So we talked a little bit about what you can bring with you other than like the portables and stuff. Thinking about like some packaged products, I guess I can share with you. Think about things like bars. Is it going to be more granola based or carb based, or is it going to be more fat based, like a nut butter bar? Think about like what am I trying to accomplish? What sits well for me? But I have people bringing things like granola bars, nut butter based bars. They'll bring like tubes of peanut butter. I've had some people eat plain pasta. Waffles, applesauce packets are some of my favorite. Baby food packets. I go to the baby food aisle and see like what sounds good, because sometimes some changes in flavor and texture are really nice. Or if you need something to settle yourself, if you're someone who has a stomach that gets really nauseous, or you do see your stomach turning at some point, I always recommend like some kind of something that's usually gingery. So whether you like the sugar candied ginger candies, or like something that's like almost like a lolly or like a lozenge that's like ginger flavored can be very helpful. I think that stuff like that is always interesting. People bring candy with them. I'm a big fan of candy. You got to have a little bit of fun with it, especially if you maybe plan it for like a specific aid station or a specific mile marker where you're like, I'm really going to look forward to it. I think that those types of things are great. I will share my favorite candy is Nerd Clusters. If you have not had those yet, really fun, like fuel for exercise because they're like little bite-sized things and they're sour and they're crunchy and they're chewy at the same time. So I enjoy them. So if you've never tried them, please try them. They're one of my favorites. If not, it's always gummy bears or sour gummy worms for me. I really do enjoy those too. So don't be afraid of mixing it up. You can have a little bit of fun food mixed in with your whole food options, like totally fine to do. But yeah, think about some of those things. If you're someone that overheats a lot, one other thing I've heard from some of my colleagues and also some of my athletes is menthol. So like a menthol, like sore throat lozenge or something like that can help cool you down when you feel overheated. So even something like that, if you're someone who feels like they overheat all the time, trying something like that to get that cooling effect might actually be very helpful for you. And we've seen it in research to be helpful. Menthol, like they have menthol shot drinks that you can buy and drink. I'm pretty sure SIS used to make one, and I believe that maybe Morton is making one now, or Never Second, I think, is making one actually. That's like a menthol gel that's supposed to help cool your core body temperature down. So if you're someone who constantly struggles with overheating, thinking about even strategies like that during the race can be very helpful. And they may seem so small, but can change like the trajectory of your race for sure. Talking about recovery, I feel like this is something that we all kind of know, but we all focus on like physical recovery a lot more than we do like nutritional and internal recovery after running or training of any kind. Like my athletes are really great at stretching, rolling out, doing cool downs, getting their massages, like doing all those things, but like making sure that they are having nutrition right after their workouts is not always the first priority. When there was some new research that came out that basically put recovery on like a little pyramid, like we used to have the food pyramid, and the base of that pyramid was sleep. So if you don't sleep well, you are not going to recover well. That's like well known at this point. But then the next tier is usually nutrition. So are you fueling well and enough throughout the day, as well as recovering after with proper nutrition? Then it goes into like physical manipulations and stuff like stretching and massages and all of that. And then it goes into like more of those fad supplements that may help with recovery. But really, that more than 50% of that pyramid is your sleep and your nutrition. So if you're not doing those well, there's nothing else that can fix it. You have to build that base. So 4 R's of recovery: you need to refuel, you need to rehydrate, you need to repair, and you need to rest. So refuel means we went the wrong way, sorry. Refuel means that you need to replenish carbohydrates. So recovery is not just having a protein shake. It is also replenishing that glycogen, those carbohydrates that you used up. So thinking about something like a recovery shake that has carbs and protein is better. So if you're like, I have a favorite protein powder, okay, mix it with a glass of orange juice. If you're like, I don't know, I don't like to have all that stuff, okay, have a glass of chocolate milk. There's so many different options, and you can do a lot to replenish those carbohydrates. If you don't want to drink it, you can eat it, and we'll talk kind of more about that as well. Rehydrate. Don't forget that most of us don't drink enough fluid during our exercise. We never replenish exactly. Sorry. These slides are going crazy right now. Sorry. We never drink enough of what we actually lose during our exercise. So we need to make sure we're hydrating properly. Hydration doesn't just stop when you stop running. You need to be hydrating regularly throughout the day to make sure that it's getting to the right places. So make sure your recovery is paired with water or has some kind of electrolyte water component to it, a fluid. So like for some people, a smoothie or a chocolate milk may be the easiest option because they can cover a lot of the bases with something like that rather than having a bunch of different things. But hydration is just as important, especially if you're a heavy sweater or a salty sweater. You do need to make sure you're getting enough fluid in. A good way to tell if you've been like hydrating or like how much you're actually really losing, some people may weigh themselves before and after a workout and figure out how many pounds they lost. If you're hydrating well throughout a workout, you may have a shorter gap between those numbers. But if you are not hydrating well, you have a bigger gap. And that actually makes you helps you realize like, oh, dang, I need to hydrate after my workouts because I'm not hydrating well enough during. Maybe I'm going to adjust some stuff during, but I also need to adjust some stuff after. Repair. So don't forget about protein. We talk a lot about carbs with endurance sports, but protein is still important. You still need to make sure you're getting enough. You just don't need excessive amounts. I usually say you need somewhere between 20 to 40 grams of protein after an activity to repair that muscle. So maybe that means, a protein shake. It maybe means a Greek yogurt. Maybe it means that I'm going to have a meal, whatever it is. Like you need to repair with some protein. I always say you can repeat this at bedtime if you need more recovery. So if you've done a hard training session where you're just like, man, I cannot keep up right now, you might need an extra session of recovery when it comes to your protein and add something in before you go to bed. Lastly, please rest. Please find time to rest. This is something that affects everything, not only your performance, your hormones, your mood, everything is affected by your sleep. Even how well you digest your food is dictated by how well you're resting. Ideally 7 hours or more. I'm like more of an 8.5 to 9 hour person for most adults, but I know that that sounds impossible to a lot of people. So just work your way up. If you can't get a ton of sleep all at once, naps are also okay. If you can get in a nap every once in a while, that's great. One thing I always have to encourage the people is please take full rest days, especially after a race. There's no reason after an ultra marathon that you need to be going out and running the next day. Your body truly does need that rest so that you can benefit from the work that you've done. If you just keep going, you are just pounding yourself into a deeper hole and it's harder for you to get out of it and recover properly. So please take some full rest days for yourself. And if you can't sit still, do some recovery kinds of work, do some yoga, do some mobility stuff, do something that moves your body, go for a walk, but like, do not keep pushing yourself thinking that that's what's going to make you better. Taking a step back and taking care of yourself, honestly, sometimes is better for you as an athlete and it's better for your mental health as well. So please take that recovery. I feel like I have to remind people that like this is like something you want to do for the rest of your life, not just right now. So you need to take the proper rest so that you can be a better athlete in the long run. That's something that is a common theme that I notice with a lot of my athletes is like, you guys just don't want to stop. And I appreciate it. I understand the competitive nature. I understand the need to perform and keep going. But I'm here to tell you that if someone has to say it, then I will, that you guys need to take breaks because that it really does make a huge difference. Here's another visual of what I was talking about recovery. It might be a liquid option. It may be a snack. So like sometimes it's a bar. Sometimes maybe for me, it's like half a PB&J sandwich until I can get to a meal. And then lastly, sometimes it's just a meal. So if I go out for a workout and now I'm like, okay, I can eat breakfast, I'll just have breakfast. I'm not going to have a shake and then breakfast because then I sometimes usually don't finish any of it. And then I feel like I wasted stuff. So definitely think about what option you want. And it doesn't always have to be the same option. Why is IPA not listed? Man, my athletes, my runners, and their beers after workouts. Everyone always says beer is one of the best hydrations. I beg to differ. I think that it can be fun, but don't forget to hydrate. If you're going to have a can of beer after a race, please follow that with a bottle of water. I know that it's like, it's hard to say that. Like, I also am like someone that doesn't really drink often. So I understand it's part of the culture, but I really don't think that beer is a great recovery. You can enjoy it, but also if you want to have beer as a recovery, then have a protein bar or some kind of other thing with you, because it's just not enough. Just not enough. I love it, but it's just not enough. But I appreciate it, and be honest and true to yourself and have that beer if you want it. But like, please pair it with something, like have a snack while you're having a beer. Like, that's the best thing you could do. At least a pretzel or like something with it. I don't know. Have something good with it. A little bit more about hydration, because I do think that this is something that, you know, not a lot of, like, hydration is still very unknown to people. Like, there's not a lot of experts. Everyone has a different opinion or a different recommendation. But what I really like to reiterate is, like, your sweat is not just water. So you can't just drink water. There has to be some type of an electrolyte component, whether it's in your fluid or it's in the food that you're eating, or you're getting it somehow, whether it's a salt tab or in your bottle, or you're having salty snacks with you. Like, you should be having some kind of an electrolyte, because water is just not enough. I will say water is only enough if you're exercising less than an hour. So if you are doing some kind of quick workout, water's fine. But if you are doing anything more than that, you are sweating too much to not replace what you're losing. If you can look at the sweat droplet, you can see what the variation and the ratios of electrolytes are. There's 4 major electrolytes that we lose. There are definitely other trace minerals as well, but these are the main ones. And what we lose mostly is salt. So when you are looking for hydration products, you want to look for something that has sodium in it. You don't want just potassium, just magnesium. You don't want just sodium. You want something that has a mix, because you are losing a mix of it. And some people lose more of one electrolyte than the other, but we definitely want to talk about getting most of that in. On average, most of my athletes will try to have at least 16 to 20 ounces of fluid per hour, but that's not always the case. Everyone needs to experiment on what feels good for them and where they feel the most hydrated, but adding in electrolytes is very helpful. On average, I'm seeing, when we sweat test people, so we'll test how much salt is in their sweat. I am seeing that on average, most athletes are somewhere around the 800 to 1,000 milligram mark, which means on a serving size of a single packet of something, which is usually a 16 to 20 ounce serving, I usually say you need to look for about 400 to 500 milligrams of sodium, ideally. That'll get you somewhere between 800 to 1,000, and that'll cover your bases. If you've been sweat tested before, or you know you're a salty sweater, you may need more than that. And so you can either get that, you know, in your hydration drink, or it can be in the foods that you're eating. I have a lot of people who have salty foods because they like the salty during races anyways. So they may have some electrolytes in their bottle, but also rely on the electrolytes that are in their food that they're eating. The last thing I like to talk about before I give you guys a couple minutes for questions is supplements, because this is something that I get questions all the time. What supplements should athletes be taking? What should I take if I'm a runner? What should I take if I'm injured? All that. I think supplements can be very helpful. They can be very helpful, especially for us who are really busy. But you have to address foundational nutrition issues before you add in a ton of supplements. You don't need to be taking supplements just because you think you need them. I always like, if you have access to go to your doctor and get tested for mineral and vitamin deficiencies, great. At least for most runners, I say iron and omega-3 and vitamin D have to be tested, because those are the ones that I'm typically supplementing at various different ages. Those are the most common things I'm seeing that I have to supplement. And I'm comfortable supplementing, but we need to figure out what we're supplementing and why. Things like protein powders, pre-workouts, beetroot kind of products, nitrates, all of those are all supplements. One thing I like to let people know is that supplements are not regulated. The FDA does not regulate them. Nobody looks over to see if what is in that bottle is actually what's inside that bottle. No one is double checking these things. And usually what happens is something goes out on the market, sits on shelves for about 6 months, and then it gets recalled. Some of you may remember when this happened with Hydroxycut. Everybody was taking Hydroxycut, and then they changed the formulation because they realized that one part of it was not safe and it was not regulated. And so they had to pull the product. It's happened with pre-workouts all the time that I've seen, but also I just care about the longevity and long-term health of people. And if you can take supplements that are safe, yes, they may cost a couple more dollars, but in the long run, you're paying less in medical bills if something goes wrong. So I always say, look for some kind of third-party certification. Informed Sport and NSF Certified for Sport are two of the most common for sports nutrition products. So check your protein powders, check your products that you're using, but only really necessary on products that have supplement facts labels. So you have products in the market that have nutrition facts labels and products in the market that have supplement facts labels. Excuse me. I think I need some water. So make sure you're paying attention. So all Skratch products are all nutrition facts labels. They are regulated by the FDA and the USDA. They make sure that we are putting what is on the label inside the product and that it's safe. But not all supplements are like that. So like if I take an omega-3 supplement, I need to make sure that it's Informed Sport or NSF certified for sport. Yes, I'm not going to get drug tested and get popped for a race, but I care about myself just as much as an Olympic athlete does. So I'm going to put the good stuff in my body. Why should only they be able to take it? Why can't I also take it? That's my mentality. I like to be safe rather than sorry. And I like to be very conservative with my supplement usage. Personally, I use things like a pre-workout once in a while, maybe a protein powder, maybe creatine, maybe omega-3s, vitamin D. I don't take them all the time, and I supplement when I need to. So work with a dietitian, talk to your doctor, figure out if you're taking the right supplements. I think that there's a lot we can do without them, but there's also a lot of help that they can provide us, especially for people who are busy or just not sure if they can get all their nutrients through real food. Now I'm going to open it up for questions. Feel free. Here's all my information. So if you guys need to reach out to me, send me a message. I'm happy to answer. I just got back off of a couple weeks of time off. And so my inbox is very flooded right now. So give me patience, like a couple days to respond right now, but I will get back to you or send me a DM on Instagram. It's also another pretty easy way to get to me if you have a quick question or just want to ask me something really quickly, like, hey, is this the type of certification you were talking about? Or, hey, look at this pre-race fuel that I made for myself. What do you think about it? Like, totally fine to ask me those things. I love getting those kinds of messages from my athletes. So totally open to that. But now I'll let some of you guys feel free to throw in the chat or unmute yourself and ask a question. And if not, then I'll go through the list of questions that people have asked me. I know I threw a lot at you guys. I know it can be a little bit to absorb, but I know that it is very helpful. And it may not be everything that you need to know, but it's a pretty good chunk. Nutrition is like a never-ending learning process. Even I'm learning new stuff every day. Okay. I don't see any questions coming in yet. So, oh, here we go. Yeah, let's go ahead and look through some of the questions. One that stood out to me is about cramping. I know a lot of people experience cramping, so I kind of want to address this because there's a lot of like information about cramping and where it comes from and what we need to know about it. There's different kinds of cramping. So there's very many different kinds of cramping, but the one we typically see when we're exercising is called exercise-related muscle cramping. And that cramping is usually related to fatigue. It's not typically related to an extent from hydration. I do think hydration can help reduce fatigue for a lot of athletes, but I don't think hydration is usually the culprit for everyone. Typically with cramping, it's a fatigue or a fuel issue. So your muscles are fatiguing because you're not well trained, or potentially you change your shoes or your stride or whatever it is, and it messed with something, and now you are more fatigued and it's going to cause more stress on your muscles. The other thing that happens is when you're not well fueled, your muscles do not have enough fuel stored in them. So then they basically are trying to squeeze out all the energy that they can out of it, and they will cause a cramp. I do think hydration can help with all of this, because hydration does help make sure that nutrition is moving smoothly through our body. And also I think about it as, when you're well hydrated, your muscles may have less risk of cramping, because if you think about it, if you're dehydrated, think about your muscles looking like beef jerky. And if you're well hydrated, it's like a fresh piece of steak. And so you're obviously going to see some differences in how your muscles react when you're not well hydrated. So that's an easy fix. For some people, they try hydration at least first, but I also usually recommend trying fueling. So maybe you need more carbs, or you're not fueling enough consistently. And lastly, okay, well, we talked about this. What do I do now if I do get a cramp? How do I stop it? Sour, spicy, or anything that basically makes your mouth pucker will stop a cramp. So I always encourage athletes to bring something with them, like a sour candy, lemon juice packets. There's a company called Hot Shot that makes a little shot that you can take. They're the ones who actually kind of figured out how this all works. It's spicy though. So if you get acid reflux, don't do something spicy. If you get a lot of indigestion when you're running, go with something more sour or vinegary, because that's a lot more easy for you to manage in your GI system. So that's how you can stop a cramp if it is happening. But you can't really prevent cramps a lot of times other than fueling well. Someone asked, I'm 30-40 miles in and start to feel nauseous. Gingers aren't enticing. What could help with aid station food? Usually I go with something really bland. So crackers, piece of bread, rice, pasta, something plain. Even a banana could be okay for a lot of people. Also, sometimes if you're feeling nauseous and ginger candy doesn't sound enticing, try something like a Coke, because somehow that always pulls people out of it. The fizziness, the sweetness, the sharpness of it, the cold temperature typically can help us get stuff down. I usually say cold fluids typically also help, because for some reason those don't make us as nauseous. So try that. Also, we got, what about salt tablets to stop and prevent cramping? I don't necessarily think that they help with that. I think they can help you stay hydrated if you are having salt tabs and also hydrating really well. So you may want to play around with that to kind of see. I don't necessarily always think that underdoing sodium is the reason, but if you are a salty sweater, that could be the reason. If you are losing a ton of salt, you notice white on your face, your eyes are burning, your hats always have whites on it, and your jerseys and your shirts always have white stains on it, typically that means you're a salty sweater. And usually only do I see cramping related to hydration if someone has not recognized yet that they're a salty sweater and they need to replace a lot more sodium. But salt tabs are just a useful for hydrating. I don't necessarily think that they can stop a cramp. Another question, is it better to eat at aid stations when stopped, or better to spread out eating to take a little bit of time while on the trail? That's a preference. Some people like to stop and eat at the aid stations and then maybe take something along with them. Some people like to just fly through the aid stations, grab stuff, and keep going and eat on the way. Some people, may do a combination depending on the aid station and how they're feeling. Kind of depends on how things sit well in your stomach. It doesn't matter if you eat like within an hour, it doesn't matter if you eat all your carbs at one time or your fuel at one time or spread it out, your body recognizes it about the same. It's just what your stomach can handle. I'm a fan of trying to get something in while you're at the aid station, especially because there's people around you usually, and they're more encouraging and you can get some stuff down, and then take something also with you in case you can get a couple extra bites in. It never hurts. Spreading it out typically is better if you have GI issues or you're someone that, like, honestly, most people should be at least having 1 or 2 fueling sessions within an hour in my ideal world, because it just works better. That's a great question. Anything else, guys? I'm going to keep going. We're a little bit over time, but I'm happy to answer 1 or 2 more questions. Here's one. I always get questions, and like there was some questions that kind of allude to this on like what food should I stop eating at certain points or whatever. I always say, if you're someone who's like not sure about how their stomach's going to feel, I always start with more solid foods in the beginning and then move to more soft foods is what I would call them. So like solid foods may be things like a bar or, you know, like real food options that are served at aid stations. But as we get later in the race, when maybe the stomach is tired, I think of things like soft foods, like applesauce packets, chews, gels, hydrations, like things that don't really require a lot of digesting. They're pretty much already broken down so that your gut doesn't have to do more work. I also sometimes, for some people, will limit fat. Because if you're someone who has a lot of stomach issues, I probably, like, although it's very normal in ultra distance running to have a lot of fat, some people just can't take it down well. So kind of figure out what works for you, but transitioning from solid foods to softer foods tends to work really well for people who have more upset stomachs later in races. And Meredith, you asked, to contrast the typical high carb athlete, I feel mostly with fat and protein and maintain a low heart rate. Usually some carbs during a longer run is more minimal than I have done in the past. What do you recommend for someone training low carb who is preparing for a race? If you train low carb, you still need carbohydrates during a race. I feel like the lowest I've really ever seen, I'm trying to think, I saw some women get away with about 100 calories an hour using ketones, but I don't always necessarily like recommend those things unless you train and you know your body really well. I usually will say, if you train low, you still need to preload and carb load, because you're gonna need to get those glycogen stores up real high for the race. So you may train low, which is totally fine, but you may want to basically eat high carb for at least a day or 2 before the race. And during the race, you may want to introduce some carb options that may be comfortable. Everyone kind of figures out what feels good for them. And I usually live in the world of high carb, but I know that there's some people that can do the low carb, high protein, high fat. I just don't think that that's everybody. And you have to be very intuitive, and you have to have a solid gut usually to do those things. So figuring out what works for you. But I also think that most people do need to carb load before an ultra level event. So that's a great question. How many calories are in Skratch if consuming around 16 to 20 ounces per hour? Regular Skratch hydration mix is about 80 calories for a 16-ounce bottle if you do 1 scoop. I have some athletes that do like up to 2 scoops in a bottle. But if you're someone who's trying to look at how to load more calories into your bottle because you want to try a liquid strategy, we have a mix called high carb drink mix that is using a cluster dextrin, which is a more complex carbohydrate that breaks down really slowly. And so I will find a combination. So maybe I'll do like 1 scoop of regular sport mix and like 3 scoops of high carb mix to get something that's closer to like 250 calories. So I'll mix and match. So if anyone is like trying to figure out how to use, especially Skratch products, and how to mix them up to get the right amount of calories, I'm always happy to help with that, because I know that it's kind of challenging, but you can mix and match things all the time. I have some athletes who will mix and match different fuels for different hours. So like early in the race, they might have a higher sodium bottle with lower calories because they're going to eat more. And then later in the race, they might have a higher calorie bottle because they know that they're not going to be eating as much solid food. So definitely you can mix it up. What differentiates Skratch? I would say from what I see and work with every day as a dietitian. And trust me, before I was at Skratch, I worked for NFL teams, basketball teams, collegiate teams. I've used pretty much every product under the sun. What I like about Skratch is that it is very like minimal ingredients. We use fruit to flavor everything. So there's no dyes and like additives in that sense. But what I really like about it is that we're pretty focused on the science. So we include carbohydrates in a proper ratio for absorption, as well as the right amount of sodium to match most people's sweat. And I also love that our products are really mix and match. So like, I like that I can mix my high carb mix with regular Skratch and mix it to what I need. And I can change that up anytime I want. We don't use artificial sweeteners either, or like non-nutritives, which I think is a very different taste than what we're used to on the market. And we just did a taste test with like 20 other hydration brands. And it's very hard to find stuff that doesn't have sweeteners in it that are not natural sugars. So for me, that was the biggest differentiator. I also think the flavor's really light. I grew up on Gatorade. I love a good cold Gatorade when I don't feel good. But when I'm training, I like a light flavor. And so I can't do Gatorade all the time, but I can do Skratch. And strawberry lemonade is my favorite flavor. If you haven't tried Skratch strawberry lemonade, the best thing on earth. So that's my thoughts. Anything else I could answer? Always happy. Send me a DM, send me an email. I know there was a ton of questions. I can go through some of those and answer them and send them out with the recordings as well. If I can answer some stuff or like link some blogs that we have on our website that might answer them, happy to do it. But if you guys don't need anything else, I'm happy to let you guys have the rest of your evening because I know it's late. Cool. Well, again, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so happy to be able to spread more nutrition knowledge and be with some amazing people who really have some great goals to hit. And I'm super excited for the race. And if anybody wants to send me an update after their race, please feel free to do that. I love to hear how people's races went. And thank you to the coordinating team to get me out here. I know it was a little bit chaotic, but I'm really happy we could make it happen.
Thank you so much, Colette. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you
Colette.
guys.
It was
Have a
awesome.
great evening.
Have a good night, everyone. Bye.
Take care.
See you in 4 weeks.
Bye, everyone. Dane, yes. You in Mexico?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Wow,
Okay,
it's great to see you.
Good to see you, Dane.
Good to see you. Looking forward to seeing you guys in 4 weeks.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks for everything you do. Yeah.
Yeah, can't wait.
All right,
Good
see ya.
Likewise.
Cody.
See ya.
Be
Bye.
good.